Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In today's special episode, we sat down with Gregory Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association. He gives his take on the destabilization in Afghanistan, how Beijing is befriending the Taliban, what's at stake, and what that means for the U.S. Let's dive in. Hello, Gregory. Thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the show.
Great to be with you, Tiff.
So all eyes right now seem to be on Afghanistan and what's happening there. And as the U.S. and allies are bringing people out, the next big question seems to be who's going to fill the void once the U.S. leaves? What's your take on this?
Well, there are going to be many beneficiaries from this, and many groups will attempt to fill the void. The People's Republic of China is, of course, one of the major beneficiaries because it clears the United States away from Afghanistan and away from coordinated action, perhaps with India, and clears the way for the PRC to bolster its Eurasian position. The Trump administration had made enormous strides in gathering together the 5 Central Asian states and linking them potentially down through a communications, a transit zone through Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Indian Ocean. This would have meant a great withdrawal, if you like, of a great block of Central Asia from influence by either Beijing or Moscow. So that alone is a great step forward for Beijing. But Beijing wants to get access to Afghanistan territory, not only for its mineral resources, but to lay its oil and gas pipelines from Iran to Xinjiang province in the PRC. To do that, however, it needs more than an alliance, its current alliance, with the Taliban. It needs to absolutely gain influence over or friendship with the Tajik Dari-speaking Shia community, which is in largely the west and north of Afghanistan, and this is the old former Northern Alliance stronghold territory. So basically, Beijing is hoping that Tehran will be able to influence the Dari-speaking Tajik groups, while it, from Beijing, influences the Taliban, which is Pashtun-speaking and Sunni. In the meantime, though, everybody else is making gains from this except the United States and the Western allies. So really the US and its allies have been embarrassed and humiliated by this current action by President Joe Biden. So they are literally scrambling to find new ways to influence, particularly the Central Asian area. We'll also see, of course, a revitalization of the competition between and the influence of the Islamist groups around the world. This has been portrayed, obviously, as a great success for militant Islam, and particularly for the Sunni jihadist groups. What we'll see is that the Taliban will step up its activities as much as possible in the face of a new war with the Northern Alliance old group of Dari speakers. But it will also be at war, the Taliban will be at war, and is at war in a sense, with ISIS, the Islamic State, with its Afghan operations. And what we've seen even today are explosions near the Kabul airport, the work of ISIS, and these are designed particularly to embarrass the Taliban.
So there's been a lot of talks about destabilization in the area between the Taliban, ISIS, the Afghan government, what's left of it.
We see this return to civil war, essentially, in Afghanistan, in crude terms, between the Dari speakers and the Pashtun speakers, or the Shia and the Sunni. But there are other players involved as well, and it's going to be messy there. What we saw as the prospect of a stable Afghanistan came and went in the early 2000s when the lawyer Jirga, the Grand Council of Afghani traditional leaders, urged the return of King Zafar Shah to provide an umbrella under which all Afghanis could agree. It was the United States and Germany which vehemently opposed the restoration of the Afghan monarchy, and in so doing they absolutely killed off any chance of finding leadership which would be acceptable to both of the great components, the Shia and the Sunni elements of Afghanistan. And subsequently, of course, the king had died after the big Loya Jirga meeting, but his sons are still around, and the notion of that revived traditional leadership could be there. Because if you have that, and what that was a fairly weak central government, you could have then the ability of the regions to live their own lives, follow their own customs and the like, and live more or less in harmony, and even to trade satisfactorily amongst themselves and build the rudiments of an infrastructure, roads, rail, and the like. So it's all possible, but it's going to take some creative thinking. And what we have not seen for some time is that kind of creative thinking coming out of the US State Department, or for that matter, out of the NATO alliance.
So you mentioned in your recent op-ed Beijing's desperate bid to support the Taliban. Some of the players involved are Russia, India, and China. Can you expand on that?
We see, of course, the rivalry between ISIS and the Al-Qaeda groups in Afghanistan. So it's going to be a mess for a while. There's a new civil war taking place there. But one of the beneficiaries, great beneficiaries of this, will be Moscow. It had risked under the Trump initiative losing control over the Central Asian states. They were looking to escape from Russian and Chinese domination so that they could trade with the outside world without going through Russia or mainland China. Now, because of the threat of Taliban-based Islamic radicalism, they're sealing off the borders from Afghanistan to Pakistan and the like, and calling on Russia to provide security assistance. So once again, Russia is rebuilding its Central Asian empire, not in the way that it did in 1917 or under the Soviets. It's now literally going to be an issue of Moscow regaining security control and trade influence, currency influence, and the like. This is going to do a lot of good for Russia's rebirth as a global strategic power. Well, we have to see this whole event as part of the great conflict also between the CCTV and India. There's no question that both India and the PRC are jockeying for position there. There's no question that Beijing is concerned that the Indian government will, sooner rather than later, make a military move westward from its position in Kashmir and try to cut off Pakistani-controlled Azad Kashmir, which is over on the Afghan border. Now, that's significant because not only could the Indian forces achieve that, because they've got almost 1 million troops in Kashmir, they could reach and create an Indian corridor to the Wakhan corridor of Afghanistan and therefore link up with Central Asia. In so doing, they would cut the People's Republic of China off from its land access via Pakistan to the Indian Ocean. This would be game, set, and match, if you like, for the PRC. So the PRC will do everything it can to avoid being isolated or cut off in that manner. That's why it wants to establish separate land links with Afghanistan. If the Indians make a move, you can be guaranteed that the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, will make its own move. So this could be a major battle, and I think there's no question that although the ultimate adversary of the Communist Party of China is the United States, it recognizes that India could be its major near-term military adversary.
So India is a U.S. ally, and now there are reports that India is teaming up with Moscow. So how do you see that as playing out?
India and Russia never lost touch. Yes, they were linked through the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Of course, India and Russia historically regard each other as strategic adversaries in the great game for control of Central Asia. And what we're seeing is, yes, a lot more tactical strengthening of relations and military supply opportunities between Russia and India. And that's going to be very significant, and India will fall back on that as it loses some degree of trust with Washington. But at the end of the day, they are competing for influence in Central Asia as they have done since the 18th and 19th centuries with the Great Game. At that point, of course, it was the British controlling the legislature. So India needs to be a heartland power, a territorial power that reaches into Central Asia. It hasn't been in that position literally for 100 years. And this is just one opportunity. So it's not going to let Moscow stand in the way of that. So if India can create its own land bridge with Afghanistan and then up into particularly Uzbekistan and provide that opportunity for an outlet for the Central Asian states to trade with the world through Indian ports, it will do that.
So what does that mean going forward?
India benefited enormously from the U.S. position in Afghanistan. Traditionally, the Indian government was working through its own support base in Afghanistan and was actually funding a lot of the jihadist troops, particularly in order to embarrass Pakistan and to make it look as though Pakistan was a driver of the Taliban movement, which was actually a grave distortion of the reality. Now, India has to go into open support for the Russian position in Afghanistan, and it is doing that. There's no question that the Tajik Dari-speaking forces under the former President Nasrallah Saleh, or acting President Nasrallah Saleh, are being supported by India and Russia, although I think that we will still see covert links between India and the Taliban, particularly where this will serve to embarrass Pakistan. So that's going to be one thing. However, there's no question that New Delhi has been very, very disquieted, to say the least, with the U.S. behavior in the last few months in Afghanistan. And New Delhi sees that this throws the efficiency of the quadripartite alliance of India, Japan, the United States and Australia into a less effective position. Certainly, the Quad cannot rely on the prestige which it had enjoyed until recently. So New Delhi, I think, feels that the burden of distracting or containing the PRC is going to come mainly from Indian forces. And for example, there's no question that if the PRC saw this as an opportunity to attack Taiwan, then that would be, I think, a signal for India to launch its attack across Azad Kashmir into Afghanistan from Indian-held Kashmiri territory. This would, of course, as we discussed, create that bigger war immediately with the PRC, because the PRC would be absolutely obliged to respond to that physically on the border region with Japan and the eastern Indian border with the People's Republic of China. So India is getting ready for a bigger game. Whether it's up to it is another matter, but certainly Indian forces in this region, I think, are going to be more than a match for the PLA forces. So there's no question this is not an easy situation for Beijing to face, largely because of the climatic and territorial difficulties in this region. But both adversaries would be having a more or less equal balance in tactical aircraft, in on the ground artillery, and certainly in nuclear weapons in this area. And it would be a very difficult war for both parties. So that's really the great concern there. India would prefer to be able to achieve its objectives without obviously getting into an open confrontation with the PRC. And if it can reach its land bridge up into Central Asia, then that is a long-term strategic defeat for Beijing.
So in the last 20 years, when the U.S. had a presence in Afghanistan, many Western countries and free markets invested heavily in the country. How do you see that as playing out in the economic field? Are these companies pulling out?
I think most of them will pull out or find themselves forced to just cut back and cut their losses, simply because, as far as Beijing is concerned, they will try to pay off the Taliban to a great degree to ensure that the West cannot get its investment back. For the PRC, its great goal would be to exploit what it can of the mineral resources in Afghanistan. Basically, what we'll see is if US and Western firms don't pull out, they're going to just face continued losses, I believe, in the medium term. That's not to say that this is going to be the case in 3-5 years' time. The US, of course, has lost prestige, which is its most critical asset in Central Asia, as well as around the rest of the world. But the trading corridor now for the Central Asian states, if they don't want to trade through Chinese or Russian territory, is that they'll trade across the Caspian Sea to Azerbaijan, which, because of the war in October and November last year between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Azerbaijan has regained its land access down to its exclave of Nakhchivan. So trade theoretically can go across the Caspian, across Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan to Turkey, and then to the Mediterranean and Europe. So it's a slender corridor which gives them a lifeline. And of course, if India makes its way up into the region, or there is some quiescence, if you like, in northern Afghanistan, then you may still get a land bridge over to Pakistan and or India. But really, it's become much more problematic because of the unrest, which is going to get worse before it gets better.
And for those just tuning in, that was today's special episode with Gregory Copley, president of the International Strategic Studies Association. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.